Okay, so my name is James Wilson. I'm based at the University of Oxford, and I'm going to be talking to you this morning about the data management rollout at the university. This is both a project, it's just a funded project, the Damaro project, but it's also a longer term process that we're going through at the moment as we try to really put together a unified infrastructure that will meet all the requirements that our researchers and their funders have. So we actually began work on our RDM infrastructure back in 2008 when we conducted some interviews with a number of researchers across different disciplines to really start to find out what the researchers themselves wanted from the university in terms of their research data management. So we started off really from the perspective of trying to assist researchers rather than to comply with funders. But over the last few years, the context in which we're working has changed quite considerably, and now there are many more of the UK funders have policies in place which need to be met. So it's become perhaps a little bit more driven by the legislative agenda than it was initially. Between then and now, we've engaged in several GIST-funded projects. They've developed a number of tools and services, or in the process of developing tools and services, and training materials and various other things. I think it's fair to say that what we've done so far, it's been managed by various different parts of the university. It's been working with various different research groups and with different disciplines, and it's been a fairly loosely kind of coordinated, slightly opportunistic approach we've taken. We're now really trying to change that into a much more coordinated approach to developing our research data management infrastructure, with the university really driving what we're doing rather than different parts taking opportunities. Two things that haven't really changed, though, are the basic principles that we started off with, that the researchers themselves need to be at the core of the developments, and that it needs to be an intra-institutional collaboration amongst our key service providers. So the research services, the IT services, and the Bodleian libraries all have expertise and skills that need to be tapped, and the divisions need to work together rather than being just led by one particular part of the university. We do now have a university research data management policy in place. The second time of asking, we went through exactly the same issues as you just heard about from the University of Nottingham, but it is now up and running. We've got one there. And we've also formed a working group consisting of senior members of the support divisions to create and present a business case to the university, and we should hopefully be submitting that by the end of this month. So by the end of February and March, we should know whether we've got financial support from the university to really underpin what we're doing. Now, those of you who attended the poster session yesterday may have seen this already. This is essentially our kind of near-term vision for the kind of infrastructure we're trying to build. So along the top here, we have the various activities that researchers undertake, and we've tried to loosely align those with the tools that the tools and services that we're developing within the university. The blue ones are what we're actually developing within Oxford. The red ones are external, parts of the external infrastructure of this, because of course Oxford, like every other university, doesn't just exist in its own bubble, but there are research data management infrastructure outside of the university. And it's all underpinned by the RDM policy, the training and support materials we've developed, which have to guide the researchers throughout the entire process, and the sustainability model that we're working on at the moment. I'll briefly fly through some of these tools. The DMP Online Oxford, many of you I'm sure are probably already aware of the DMP Online. We've been trying to work on our own version, that's currently in development. Data Stage, this is kind of a Dropbox-like facility which enables researchers to share files with each other easily and attach metadata to those. These screenshots are all very early in development versions, so they'll look much prettier when you come to launch these things. The ORDS, the Online Research Database Service, is essentially a dial-up database service for researchers, again enabling them to put access controls on who can see their data and who can edit it and so forth. It'll look a bit like that. Databank will be our institutional data archive for the data that's created within Oxford, which doesn't have more subject-specific, higher curated level services to go for. So this is to catch the things that can't go to the subject-specific repositories and so forth. And in development version looks a bit like that. Data Find you'll hear a bit more about in the future. My colleagues Sally and Neil will talk about that after this, so I won't go into detail. But essentially it acts as a catalogue of all the research that our researchers at Oxford are producing, wherever it's going, whether it's into our own internal repository or whether it's being hosted elsewhere. And it'll look a little bit like that. Now the orange lines you see going between things here, that shows the flow of data and the metadata attached. So one of the things we're trying to do is really start to connect all of the tools and services we've been doing so that they do form this unified infrastructure. So the data management plans will go to data bank, and the metadata that we can gather at that stage will be auto-completed in the later stage, in the later tools, so the researchers don't have to go through and every time they do anything, go through a huge list and add metadata, because we know that our researchers are now doing that. I wouldn't call them lazy, but their time is precious. Likewise, the information we're gathering during data stage, which is for active research data and awards and any departmental data stores, will all be passed through. And ultimately the aim is to really add value to the whole process by enabling the access and reuse you see at the top to get the data back and helping other research projects in the future. I mentioned that what we're doing is very much driven by what our researchers want. We've just undertaken quite a large-scale survey. We realised that we have lots of information about researchers, about different things, about different tools, but what we didn't really have is a general overview about research practices and general research attitudes. So we conducted this survey for 4 different reasons. Partly so that we could measure impact in the future. That was driven very much by the GISP agenda, but also it's very useful for us to see how successfully the work we're doing is changing attitudes, it's driving cultural change at the institution. It's partly so that we can get data to underpin our business plan, our presentation. It's partly for service planning, so we can get some ideas of these services when we launch them, just what the demand is likely to be. And it's partly, I knew I was going to forget one of my 4 reasons, but it will come back to me. Anyway, we've had over 300 responses so far. They've been fairly evenly divided, which is useful, between our 4 academic divisions, as you can see on the left there, so humanities, the mathematical, physical and life sciences, medical sciences and social sciences. And I'm going to draw a few of what I think to be the interesting and kind of generalisable points out of this survey. One of the first things that I'd like to draw attention to, and I think sometimes, and I've noticed it in this conference as well, a lot of us when we talk, we assume that researchers work in large groups, that they have kind of data analysts who work for them, who work for these research groups. They work in the biological sciences, areas where there's quite a lot of attempts being made to introduce good RDM practice. What we actually found is the red area there is people who work part of a team with the research data being managed by the team. The other area is people who work as part of a team, but each member of the team manages their own data. The green area, which is quite large, is people who work as individuals. The survey is people who work with data, who generate data, but a lot of them are actually working as individuals. And I think that's something that we need to remember. And the blue quarter there is people who do some of their research as individuals and some in teams. In terms of the kinds of research data that our researchers are generating, as you might expect, we have quite a lot of statistical, numerical, textual data, but it's also interesting to see that what we might have thought of as minority data types, there's actually quite a lot of people who are working with those. So the bar in the middle there is images. So over 1 in 3 of the people we surveyed work with image data. There's also audio data and geospatial data, which have reasonable enough minorities working with that kind of data. So if you're going to provide a university-wide service, eventually you're going to start to need to factor the data needs of these kind of researchers into what you're doing. In terms of how data is stored, a lot of people store their data in word processing files. Probably not best practice in many cases, but we need to go into greater detail to understand that. Lots of people in tables and spreadsheets. About a third of our respondents use relational databases. Quite a high number of people use other unstructured forms of databases as well, which I found quite interesting. And then there's quite a diverse set of other kind of tools that are being used. In terms of researcher attitudes towards research data management, I think our results here are quite positive. Given a range of options to choose from regarding the importance of research data management, a large majority said it was essential and that their research would suffer significantly if their data weren't properly managed. So I think we can use that in itself as a kind of means of supporting the importance that researchers attach. Unfortunately, few of them reported have received any actual information about research data management from the university, so that's something we're going to try and drive up and monitor in the future so we can actually provide a bit more of what it seems researchers are actually quite keen for. We also asked if people had ever been inspired to undertake new research after looking at research data that had been shared in the past, because this is something we're going to use to measure the success of what we're doing and see if we really can connect up these kind of flows I was talking about earlier. And about a third of the people we asked said that they had been inspired by looking at previous shared research to actually undertake new research. The yellow quarter is people who said it may have played a part, but it wasn't the sole part. In terms of attitudes towards data sharing, it's perhaps a little less encouraging, but at least it gives scope for improvement. When asked whether people had placed their research data in the past in a dedicated repository or data store, slightly over a quarter said they had, although there are some false positives in here. But the majority said that they'd never done this in the past. And when we asked about their reasons for that, actually the biggest reason for doing that was not that they didn't want to share it publicly. About 1 in 4 people said that. About 25% of those said no said that. But actually the biggest reason was simply that they weren't aware of an appropriate data store. And this then ties in with the kind of findings we had about demand for data bank. That I think a lot of people don't have disciplinary specialised data stores where they can put things. And when we asked them how much they would like to use data bank in the first year, we actually got quite an alarming number of people who said they had a lot of data that they would like to put there. So we now actually need to work out how to provide for all that. Let's talk very briefly about sustainability again, because it's something that obviously everyone's now having to come to terms with. In the UK, there have been encouraging noises made by the Research Council's UK. I'll read this out. It is appropriate to use public funds to support the management and sharing of publicly funded research data, maximise the research benefit which can be gained from limited budgets. Mechanisms for these activities should be both efficient and cost-effective in the use of public funds. So there is this idea that the research councils will contribute funds to help with RDM. In practice, however, the different research councils seem to be taking slightly different stances, and most of them haven't really been put to the test yet to work out exactly what they will be happy to fund and what they won't be. Within our own infrastructure, we're looking at applying different kind of funding models to different parts of the infrastructure. So some of the services that you saw on that earlier on, we're developing in terms of cost recovery, that we're going to hope to pass the costs on to the researchers and ultimately to their funding bodies, because they're services that not every researcher is going to rely on, and it should give them real positive advantages to the research they're doing. These may need to be subsidised at first, essentially, by the university. There are other services which are almost certainly going to need central funding, with the costs included in overheads or some other kind of mechanisms, because we can't expect the researchers themselves to be able to pay for it. And we don't want to discourage people from using the infrastructure by applying high prices to it. Another aspect is that the value of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Each of the kind of tools and services you saw, the software behind it is open source. They can be taken, they can be applied. But it's only when you combine them into this whole infrastructure you can really get the benefits of moving the information along and moving it through. So by having unified infrastructure, we think we can get better value for money. And another issue we come across is that non-institutional RDM solutions can often appear cheaper to researchers because they don't have the costs of all the support, centralised support behind them. So this is something we need to make a case for to our researchers to persuade them that rather than getting a bit of kit from PC World, the added security that you get from using the central infrastructure is well worthwhile. In terms of solutions, it's still very much work in progress at Oxford. We are preparing brief ideas to present to the university, as I said, later this month. Some of the things we're doing are going to be quite lightweight open source software, so that they can be picked up and used with a minimum of kind of support. And DataStage is an example of that. You can basically take it, install it on any kind of storage mechanism, cloud or otherwise, and then just set it up and use it for your own group. Other services will require quite heavy-duty support behind them to make them useful, and the research database service is one of those. And some of the materials we're doing, particularly for training, we're actually going to be avoiding the cost directly. We're trying to embed it in existing training programs, both to reach the researchers who might otherwise not be aware of it, but also to just make it into one of the core things that the university does as a matter of course. This is particularly important where there are big disciplinary differences, because while some of the training materials might be quite generic, we've worked out that we need to provide examples from the different disciplines before they'll really be understood and taken seriously by the researchers. So my final slide, final thoughts. The funders are increasingly driving the agenda, but researchers do need to be involved to shape the solutions, otherwise they're unlikely to use them. Particularly in the University of Oxford, we can't mandate that researchers use our solutions. It's the principle of subsidiarity that we work to, so researchers are free to choose what kind of solutions they want. Central services require assiduous promotion to researchers. Researchers pay far more attention to what's going on in their discipline rather than what's being provided by their institution. And we know this as part of our survey was about awareness of existing services, and they were generally disappointingly low. That promotion also needs to be factored into cost models. It's useful to try and assess the potential uptake of services. As I mentioned, it looks like our data bank uptake is going to be much larger and much quicker than we initially thought, and we have to bear that in mind. And also the different business models for different RDM services might be a sensible approach. Not least because by adapting this kind of modular structure, it makes it much easier to add new components in the future. Other universities are developing other tools. We will probably want to slot them into our infrastructure in due course. And some of the tools, it may turn out that they're not that popular amongst researchers, and they can be removed without sort of breaking the entire infrastructure. So, I think that's about it for me.